Hello, welcome to Killing It. This week, we're talking to LaDonna Humphrey, executive producer of the indie documentary film Uneven Ground, the Melissa Witt story. Could you please catch us up to speed on the case of Melissa Witt?
Yeah, sure. So on December 1st, 1994, 19-year-old Melissa Witt drove to Bowling World in Fort Smith, Arkansas, to visit her mom. Her mom bowled in a league. And as it turned out, Melissa never made it inside. A missing persons report was filed. There was a search for 45 days. And on that 45th day, there was a call from the sheriff's department in Franklin County, Arkansas, that a body had been found in the Ozark National Forest in Franklin County, roughly 50 miles away from the abduction site. And unfortunately, as that turned out, it was the body of Melissa Witt. So here we are 26 years later, working really hard to bring her justice and some closure to the case. And it's had a lot of twists and turns, but the case is still very active and will continue to be until that day when law enforcement solves the case.
Is it a cold case?
It is considered a cold case. Many of the cold cases in that particular department are still pretty active, particularly those in Fort Smith, but also in a surrounding town called Alma, Arkansas. That's where we have the case of a 6-year-old girl who went missing 26 years ago. You may be familiar with that. That's the Morgan Nick case. So they're cold cases, but active in terms of leads are still being called in, and those leads are looked into. And then, of course, in our situation, with my team who's been working on this documentary and investigating the case and working with law enforcement for the past 6 years, we work every angle that we can. And so we keep things alive for Melissa's case.
How did your team form?
I had been a part of a missing persons organization called Let's Bring Them Home. And we had actually absorbed the National Center for Missing Adults. And, we'd been around, been doing work for 10, 11 years throughout the United States, and really felt compelled to put my journalism background to work and felt like it would be important to produce a documentary. There's just not, at the time that we started this, we really weren't seeing the rise of those true crime docs that are so popular now. And so we looked at a bunch of missing persons cases across the United States, and the production team and myself and the people involved really just kept coming back to Melissa Witt's case. Even though she wasn't missing anymore, it was just something that was in our own backyard, something that impacted us all in different ways. And we decided that that was the avenue in which we were going to follow. And almost from the beginning, law enforcement just embraced our efforts, and really the rest is history. But it was just something about Melissa's case was so haunting. We couldn't walk away from it. So that's how we chose that case. And then my team kind of formed just because a couple of us had been working missing persons for many years in a nonprofit capacity. We brought in a production company, and then we also brought in some retired detectives and some private investigators.
How did your team even know where to start with creating the documentary?
It was really just another woman and I, her name is Amy Smith. We co-founded Let's Bring Them Home, and we had worked together for, like I said, over a decade in missing persons cases. So we were pretty familiar about how to work with law enforcement, how to get a case back into the media. That's what our specialty was with the nonprofit agency that we ran. So the skill set was already there. All we needed to do is we contacted law enforcement in Fort Smith. We asked to meet with the retired detectives and the chief of police. We told them a little bit about who we were, other things that we had accomplished, what we had hoped to do with the documentary. And we asked, not only interview them on camera, but to have access to the case file. And so law enforcement at that time made sort of an unprecedented decision to allow us to have full access of the case files. And that was just a relationship that we built with them, a lot of trust. It's really pretty rare for law enforcement to allow a civilian to see case files and to know everything that's in the case record. We don't take for granted, there's information we absolutely will not release because it could be damaging to the case. At the same time, I think we've brought value to her case as well. So it's just a relationship we've built, and it kind of all aligned and worked out.
Other than the boy who heard someone yell "help me" outside the bowling alley at around 6:30 p.m. the night of Melissa Witt's abduction, have any other witnesses come forward?
At this time, I can't give out that information, but I can tell you that's something that we're actively working right now. And so as soon as that information becomes public, I'll make sure that I share it with you first.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there any DNA recovered?
At the scene, there was blood, there was a crushed earring, there was a crushed hair clip that she had in her hair. So those things were recovered there at the scene because there had been a struggle in the parking lot. They were able to determine that the blood pools were that of Melissa Witt. And as far as at the crime scene, yeah, there's always DNA. And so that's also another angle that law enforcement is actively looking at, and actually having some of that DNA from the crime scene itself retested.
Hopefully there will be a breakthrough.
I hope so. I hope that if the person who killed Melissa Witt is still alive, that he feels the pressure, that I feel like we're closer than ever to solving this case. And I would think that the person responsible should be really concerned. I say this all the time. Anything that's done in the dark is always going to be brought to light. There's a lot of exposure, a lot of really good activity happening around the Witt case right now. And I just think that if I were the person responsible in that situation, that I would be really concerned because it's all coming together. I just think we're really close.
It's widely reported that Melissa Witt had an argument with her mother the day she disappeared concerning money. Did the investigation uncover any money issues?
Well, I mean, she was a 19-year-old college student, and most 19-year-old college students have money issues. It's just the way that it goes, and it was a typical argument over a very small amount of money, very minuscule amount of money. Melissa was going to be paid the next day. Her mom told her no, she could just wait, in an effort to kind of teach her daughter better money management and those kind of things. So I know that there has been schools of thought where people think that, that particular argument had something to do with her disappearance. It's very unlikely that it did. It was a real typical argument that most teenagers do have with their parents. And it's just unfortunate it happened on the day that Melissa Witt disappeared. I mean, it impacted her case in multiple negative ways. But it really was nothing more than, hey, I would, I'd like to borrow a little bit of money. I want to go out to eat. I want to get the oil changed on my new car. A new car had been given to her. So she was paying for gas and she was paying for insurance for a brand new car. And she's a college student, that's working part-time. So it's nothing unusual, nothing that it's real alarming. I just think it's impacted the case in ways that was not necessary.
So that information more hindered it than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that obviously it needs to be looked at. I think some of the negative impacts that it had on the case were obviously initially when the missing persons report was filed that Friday morning when the patrolman came out to Mary Ann Witt's home, and she was concerned that, that Melissa hadn't come home that Thursday night. She'd never done that before. And the patrolman asked, well, have you had any kind of argument? And of course, that had to play into the decision. And in his mind, as would any good officer who sees this hundreds of times, a month, people get mad, they take off, and then they come back. That patrolman at that time, with not knowing all the information, because nobody had all the information yet, really thought that this was the case of someone who just kind of ran off from home. She was going to cool off. She was with friends, and she would be back. So that caused a couple of days delay in the case. And that's unfortunate. And then it's just sort of spurred into some negative rumors that really were not substantiated by any facts in Melissa's life. So that's one of the things that our team has worked really hard to kind of dispel those rumors. So, but it's a good question and it had to be looked at. I mean, it just is what it is.
What was it that changed the police's mind about Melissa being a runaway?
Melissa at that point had been gone. She didn't come home Thursday night. Friday morning, Mary Ann early calls the police, makes a report. Mary Ann had already been reaching out to all of Melissa's friends. Everybody that knew Melissa knew that this was not something Melissa would do. She would not take off. She would not just not contact her mom. Melissa was very responsible. She was just a really good girl. Went to church every Sunday, really had good morals. This was just not anything they'd ever experienced. And so everybody that knew Melissa knew that something was wrong. So her family and friends got together and they created their own search team, and they made up flyers and they started passing them out all over Fort Smith, the River Valley area, looking for Melissa, asking for people, have you seen this girl? And their efforts made the news. And when it hit the news that Saturday, Sunday, that's when the major crimes unit saw it on the news and said, give me that file of this runaway. And that's when they got boots on the ground. And so as soon as they had boots on the ground, they discovered her car at Bowling World. And that's from there, the other items were found in the parking lot, and they knew that they had a serious crime on their hands at that point.
Was there a boyfriend or potential suitor in the picture for either Melissa or her mother?
Melissa's mom did not have a boyfriend, so that was not, her entire life was just Melissa. They built their life around the church. And so, no, there was not a significant person in her life. They did, they have to question everybody that was close to Melissa, people that she had recently dated. She didn't have a steady boyfriend at the time, but there were lots of young men that were attracted to Melissa. She was, just a beautiful girl. They had to question friends, co-workers, everyone. So it was pretty typical. As far as like one suspect right out of the gate, no. That would actually take years to develop.
Did anyone ever find the Good Samaritan that helped Melissa jumpstart her car the day she disappeared?
Yes, they did. He came forward immediately. They knew who he was. He was a local businessman, and he truly had nothing to do with this crime. He was looked at and re-looked at and cleared. He truly just tried to help her jumpstart her car that day. That was really it. And again, that's one of those things that really had to be looked at because this happened on the day that she disappeared. And so they took it very, very seriously. But Melissa was with a coworker. The coworker stayed with Melissa until the car was started, and Melissa actually left before the coworker. So, but yeah, that's a good question. Lots of people ask me about the Good Samaritan. And in all fairness to him, his name's just not been released to the media.
Is there any evidence that Melissa Witt was being followed?
I want to be kind of careful, not evasive at all, but just because of different angles that are being looked at in the case. It'd be difficult to identify and say for certain that she'd been followed. I do believe that, it really comes down to two really major suspects in this case. And one has been publicly named and the other one has not.
Okay.
For a reason, but they are looking really closely at the history of people in Melissa's life that she was close to. And that's probably all I can say about that.
Okay, great, thank you. And then when the body was found, there was a lot of oddity because it was moved.
Mm-hmm.
So the last bit of information that I had was that two hunters found Melissa. Police decided that a human had to have moved the body from where it was originally to where it was found. Has there been any updates on that?
The phone call that came into the police department a day or two before her body was found, those people have not been identified. As far as who moved Melissa's body, and I believe it had something to do with that phone call. There's a couple of schools of thought on why they wouldn't want to come forward. But I think that, and we've not identified who moved the body, but the body was definitely moved. It was not large animal activity on her body at all. It was like not a bear or a mountain lion or something moved her. A human moved her body. No doubt about that, from where it could be seen from the road, which would be a really gruesome task because of the state of the body. And I think that there's probably two pretty valid schools of thought on who could have moved the body. And that would be someone that truly just came across the body and realized that this could be Melissa Witt and freaked out and moved the body so the body could be found easily. Or maybe they planned to come back and wanted to be able to, tell somebody where the body was. That's possible. It's also possible that somebody moved the body because they had some sort of knowledge of the crime and they felt guilt and wanted her mom to be able to give her a proper burial.
Okay.
And it's also possible that this person had some sort of criminal history that made them afraid to actually come forward and say that they had found the body or moved the body because they thought they would be blamed. And so all of that is really valid. And I suspect that part of this case may always remain a mystery, unfortunately. And it's mind-boggling to me, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very big event in someone's life, even if they had nothing to do with the crime. That's not something that you would forget or move past.
No, the state of Melissa's body was, she'd been out in the elements for 44 days, 45 days. And so it was gruesome. And so I believe that task probably haunts this person if they're still alive to this day. It would me. I think it
Yeah.
would most people.
Oh, definitely.
I'm grateful that she was recovered the way she was. And we know that her body had not been out there the day before because the trappers that found her went out that road every day. So they had been there and her body was not there before, but then it was there the next day. So really the moving of her body really does coincide with that phone call that came into the major crimes unit that evening on the answering machine. And so I think they were scared. I think it was a horrifying event and they didn't know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does the evidence suggest that the body was out in the elements for 45 days before it was discovered?
She was there. Her body was there the whole time. The autopsy report is pretty specific about, Melissa had been strangled. And as she was strangled to death, face down, she inhaled dirt, debris, and leaves that were tested that were found down in her airway during that strangulation, and it came from the Ozark National Forest. So we know that she was taken out there and that she was killed, and her body had some pretty advanced, the upper half of her body was pretty well decomposed, and the bottom half was not really as decomposed because of the way her body had been positioned behind the rock. And so she'd been out there for 45 days. There was small animal activity, and it was pretty horrific, but it's just a sad thing. She deserved better than that.
Oh, absolutely. This whole case is devastating.
It is. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I am not going to stop until we get justice for Melissa. She deserves it, and we're going to do everything that we can to make that happen.
Absolutely. What do you believe are the biggest factors that contributed to the case going cold?
That's a good question. I would have to say a couple of things. 6 months after Melissa went missing, and her body was recovered, Morgan Nick went missing in Alma, Arkansas, and that's one of the biggest child kidnapping cases in the United States. It remains unsolved, and obviously, Melissa's body had already been recovered, and I by no means am implying they weren't still working her case, because of course they were.
Of course.
But all hands were on deck to find a missing 6-year-old girl. That really grabbed the attention of the community, of the state, and honestly of the nation. And the Morgan Nick case had a tremendous impact on the Witt case. And I think that contributed to a lot of just the inability to be able to continue to work something the way that you want to, or the way that it deserves, because you've got this new case that's come up. And then there's just also other crimes on a regular basis that come up. About 300 people were questioned in the Witt murder. Law enforcement did an amazing job. J.C. Ryder, the lead detective, just phenomenal work. Did everything he could. He's still, to this day, I talk to the man several times a week. To this day, he's not going to rest until that case is solved. So the passion was there, but is the manpower always there? No. That was pre-social media and pre-really anything happening like what we see now, with different people advocating, becoming an advocate for certain cases. So I think that a lot of that just went against Melissa's case. And I think it's just something that was horrifying and traumatizing to the community. It was the first time anything like that had really happened in the sleepy little town of Fort Smith. And I think all of those things just contributed to the inability to kind of know how to move forward, and the inability and the fear for people to come forward if they did have information. And so we've spent almost 6 years trying to change that, and it's still not easy. It's still a really difficult task, but thank goodness for social media and the different platforms that we have now to reach a larger audience of people who've moved away, that might have information about the case. And I don't think all hope is lost, but I think all of those things did contribute to the fact that we're here 26 years later and her case is unsolved.
Yes, I completely agree. Speaking of social media, though, at the time of a previous interview, you have answered over 6,000 emails?
Yes, it's probably a little bit closer to 7,000 or 8,000 at this point, because we've seen a real big influx of emails come through because of the trailer that we just dropped for the documentary. And so we get a lot of contacting us about that. We've answered thousands of emails, hundreds of phone calls. I've probably interviewed close to 400 people myself. So
Wow.
yeah, we're pretty dedicated to this. So I did an interview and something interesting was said to me. They said, if I was the person who murdered Melissa Witt, I think I would be afraid of you, LaDonna Humphrey. And I said,
Absolutely.
I said, good, because they need to be, because I'm absolutely not going to stop until she gets justice. And the case has just really impacted me on a personal level. Being out at that site where her body was found, it's pretty gripping. It's pretty horrifying. And, it's like I told you earlier, she deserved better than that. And somebody needs to be behind bars.
Do you have a release date for the documentary?
Yeah, it'll come out this summer. It's going to be a little bit different than what you see when a documentary typically drops. As of right now, we're going to do a pretty large private showing with people who've signed up to see it. And then we're going to run the festival circuit somewhat. And then we'll continue to do some negotiations with a distributor or, a major national platform. So we're not really sure what that looks like yet. We've had different negotiations with different companies, and we'll just kind of have to see. We're pretty particular that we're able to tell the story in the way that we feel like brings her honor. It's not a sensational thing. We're not going to show crime scene photos, those type of things. We want people to remember Melissa's life. She's more than her murder.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're going about it a little bit differently. I mean, this is truly about as indie as a documentary can get. And we're actually pretty proud of that because we've done a lot of work. And I know that we've had a lot of inquiries about the documentary. And just for the documentary, we did a sign up for people to have, 2, 3, 4, 500 spots to see the private showing. And we've had over 18,000 people at this point sign up for those spots. So yeah, we're a little overwhelmed with that. That's fantastic. And we're excited, but we're not willing right now to go ahead and launch it on like a YouTube platform or something like that. We just think that it's better to go the route that we're going right now, particularly because we're really hopeful that we'll be able to maybe go back and add an ending to the case. That's how close we think we are.
Wow. That's phenomenal. And it sounds like you're doing everything right. You're not rushing into anything. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, originally when we took on this project, and I laugh when I tell the story, originally I thought that this project would take 6 months, really, that we were just going to get in, tell the story and get out. Like that was it.
Yeah.
I never had any idea or any inkling or any plans or anything to jump in and actually investigate the case the way that I have. That was just not something that I had planned to do. But I'm telling you, the day that I was out at the site, we'd met with law enforcement in the parking lot at the Fort Smith PD to all decide how we were going to get out to the site in Franklin County where Melissa's body was found. And one of the detectives said, well, let's go, let's load up, let's head to the dump site. And I remember feeling so horrible that it was called the dump site.
Yeah.
It made me feel sad. And on the drive over, I was looking at Melissa's photos in my file, and this beautiful girl who died so young and in such a horrific way, and that the place that she was found was considered a dump site. That just to me was really awful. And when we got out there, it took an hour to get out there. When we got out there and I stepped out of the car, one of the detectives looked at me and he said, so if you screamed right now, LaDonna, nobody would hear you. Nobody. And I really was just really creeped out by that, because all I could think about was her being 19 years old. She's injured when she gets out there. She's most likely been sexually assaulted at that point, and nobody can help her. Nobody can hear her. She has to know somewhat that she's going to be killed. That's why they've taken her out to this particular location. And just the fear that she must have felt. It was that day that things just changed for me. I just knew that this young woman deserved justice, and I felt like it was something that I wanted to help with. And so that's really when things changed for me, and I became so active in working the case.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine that.
Yeah, it's sad, and it's surreal to see. It's one thing to read it or to see photos of it. It's another thing to actually be there and know that a 19-year-old's lifeless body was hidden behind a rock, just kind of hidden away. And that if she had not been moved, she might not ever be found. And it's just wrong on so many levels. And somebody is responsible. This case is completely solvable. And we've just committed ourselves to doing whatever it takes to make that happen. I just want to see it happen. I don't really, we get to be a part of that and our efforts helped in any small way, then I can sleep at night. I just want her case solved, whatever that looks like. And so, I get people asking me all the time, well, can I write about the case, or can I do this, or I can do that? And absolutely. One, I don't own the case. It's somebody out there can figure this out that's smarter than us. Please step in, because for us, it's just ultimately important that this girl gets the justice that she deserves. And that's really all that we want. And so we invite people to get involved. That's why we do interviews. We try to involve people as much as possible that are interested in the case, because that's what's going to make a difference. And we want to keep her name and her photo and her story out in the media. Every case deserves that, right? Every case deserves an advocate. It just so happens that we're Melissa's advocate. And we're just going to try to do the best job that we can.
That's awesome. And it's interesting because everything I've seen online, your name has come up and your team and everything. It's just how dedicated you guys are and have been for years. It's inspiring.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I mean, I'm just not going to let it go. And actually built a really good friendship with the original lead detective. I know she's had 13, 14 detectives on her case, over the past 26 years. And I've been able to talk to pretty much all of them.
Oh, wow.
And get people's perspective on the case. And that's been really unique. And one of the things that JC, the retired detective, and I were talking about the other day is that I'm in an interesting position now, because I may be the only living person when this is all said and done that's seen the case file, that's talked to every detective, and is in the position I am to continue to carry this on to get her justice. And so that's one of the reasons why the documentary is important. I wrote a book that will be coming out that's different than the documentary. The book is called The Girl I Never Knew, the Melissa Witt story. I mean, I didn't know Melissa, but I know more about Melissa than most people do at this point. And it's just a really weird, surreal place to be in, because it is so important to me, but it's also, sometimes it feels like a heavy burden. Sometimes it's upsetting to see that there is so much media coverage out there. It's like what you said, but it's got my name attached to it. I want more people to get involved. I want everybody to be as outraged as I am. And so, I guess it's just, a bittersweet thing for me, because I want to continue to do it, but I want to continue to inspire people to also get involved.
Oh, definitely. But like you said, you are Melissa's outlet. You are her champion. Everyone deserves one, but you are Melissa's. That's your purpose.
I am. And, recently I gave an interview with AY Magazine. And during the interview, the lady said, what is on your wrist? And I said, well, about that, I tattooed I had the word justice tattooed on my right wrist. And she said, well, why did you do that? And I said, for me, it's that reminder of what I'm fighting for with Melissa. But it's bigger than that, because for every Melissa, there's hundreds of other, men, women, and children who have been brutally murdered and their cases are unsolved, and they all deserve an advocate, that champion. And so that to me is just kind of like that reminder, this is why I'm doing it. And she was, she said, that's dedication. And I said, it is. I think we're past that. It's determination. Like, I don't want another year to go by without us knowing who killed Melissa Witt and them being charged. And if they're alive, them going to prison. Like, that's what I want to see. And so I guess that's my why. And I've probably taken it to an extreme that maybe some people won't, but I think that's what we need. And I hope that other people will rise up in their own communities and find those cases that touch them and advocate, because it makes a difference.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, there's a case in every community, at least one.
Yeah.
If not
absolutely.
more.
Yeah. And, we get requests all over the United States of families. We advocate for my child, my daughter or my son. And I wish we could. I wish we could. I do try to help point them in the direction of resources and things that could potentially help them. But all of us that are working on Melissa's case, we're doing it because it's important to us and we're passionate about it. And if we can help pass on ideas or thoughts or share resources with other people who want to do the same kind of thing in other cases, then we do try to help with that because we know how valuable it is. She went from zero internet presence in 2015. Almost zero internet presence to pretty significant information is out there about Melissa. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
other people can do that in other cases. And, we'd be glad to show them how.
That's awesome. And so what is your advice for someone who doesn't really have the background that you have, but has that passion and wants to pursue and help with a case in their community?
I think there's lots of different things that you could do. I would say, try to go to those people that are either in your community or reach out to someone like myself or other people who do similar things and just ask, hey, I want to run this past you. Hey, can you tell me how you got started? Start a conversation. Most people who are doing what I do are doing it for the right reasons, and they're going to help people who want to come up and do the same thing beside them. Like, that's what I want to do, is pass on a legacy of this is what you can do to make a difference. If you don't have somebody that you can reach out to, or you're not getting a response, or for whatever reason, there's a lot of things that you can do. If it's somebody in your community that's missing or has been found deceased, reach out to law enforcement, reach out to that person's family, start sharing information on social media about the case, credible information that you can find that's, been reported in the news, and kind of start slowly. And when other people ask me this question, I tell them document, document, document. I have notebooks upon notebooks upon notebooks of information from when I interview people, bits and pieces of rumors that I hear, timeline it, get a notebook and print everything off. Don't assume that you're going to be able to find it later.
Yeah.
And just start really slow. And sometimes you're going to run into where people aren't going to want to talk to you. But don't give up. Just keep asking, keep showing interest in the case, keep working hard. And those things pay off. I see people do it every day. Honestly, we try to help as many advocates as we can get started when they come to us and they have a passion. So I think those are the best ways to do it. And then you just never know what's going to happen out of that. Our Facebook page, we never dreamed it would take off the way that it did. We've had millions of people read and share our information. Our analytics on our Facebook page is off the charts. There are days that we're like, oh my goodness, what is going on? But I think people are hungry for information, and we live in a culture now that, is so run by social media. And I think if you're using that social media for good in a capacity to work as an advocate, I think that that's a really good tool. And so I always tell people, hey, social media is where to start. I'm telling you, it's a wealth of information, and it's a great way to pass on credible information about unsolved cases.
Oh, definitely. And you guys right now have 12,713 people following your Facebook page.
Wow.
That's ridiculous. And phenomenal.
Wow. And also it's also scary too. And so I always caution advocates of this too. One of the things that I did from the beginning is I put my name to this case. It's out there. People interview me. I've done podcasts, my photos out there, and that's all great and good if you feel like you can handle it. But there's a lot of negativity that goes with being in the public's eye too. A couple of different things. You've either got the people that really appreciate, understand the work and the effort and are supportive, or you got the people who accuse me of doing this for fame and fortune. And I get that a lot, because there's no fame or fortune. We pay for everything out of our pocket.
Yeah.
I've not made any money. If there were to be any money made on the documentary, it's going to go into a fund that will do two things. Add to Melissa's scholarship fund in Fort Smith for, she was studying to be a dental hygienist, and the college there has a scholarship. So we'll put money in that. And if her case remains unsolved, the rest of the money goes into a trust fund, because we pay for things. For example, when we got involved in the case, we've offered various rewards. We've paid to have information converted for the police department from old beta tapes to DVDs. Somebody has to pay for that. The departments don't usually have that kind of funding for cold cases. So
Yeah.
this is not my job. I have a full-time job, and I don't make any money. So there's that aspect of it. But then there's also the aspect of what I call the weirdo complex, is that we get a lot of really strange things that happen. Just real quick, I was at a grocery store one day. I have 7 kids. And I had 4 or 5 of my kids with me that day. And a man had been following us throughout the store. And I had kind of noticed it, but wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. But before we left, he came up to me and he said, "I know who you are, and I want to give you something." And he pulls out this really worn and tattered old Mickey Mouse watch. And I was like, okay, this is strange. Like, this is scary because now you know what my kids look like. Well, it just turns out that he had found this old Mickey Mouse watch and he thought that it could be Melissa Witt's and he wanted me to have it. But he found me in a grocery store. And so there's some things like that that have occurred. So I do warn advocates to really think about that because there is a killer at large. And most likely I have come in contact with him multiple times. So it's just important to consider that aspect of it. Is it worth it? It's worth it. I mean, it's worth it to me. And so it's part of the job. It's a risk of the job, but it's one that I take willingly. So anyway, that's the only, I think, downside. And it's just a big thing to consider.
Oh, absolutely. That's horrifying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could tell you some stories that would make your toenails curl. But again, people do get attached to this case and maybe they've got some instability or criminal history or, those kind of things. And so, we've dealt with a lot of that as well. And again, it's just, you have to take the good with the bad. We believe that what we're doing is well worth it. So we're willing to take those risks. But I don't know that I would necessarily say that everybody would want to do that or should do that.
You are exactly right.
How does your book, The Girl I Never Knew, differ from the documentary?
So the documentary I am not in the documentary. This is not me interviewing people. It's a story about Melissa. It is not about my efforts. It's not about my investigation or anything about that. I didn't feel like that was appropriate, and that's not why we were doing the documentary. So it's really just about Melissa Witt. But a lot of people ask me and are fascinated with the journey that I've been on in the past 6 years. And so that's really why the book was born, and it goes into my journey and how Melissa's case has impacted my life. I go into pretty big detail about just my efforts in the case. So it's really completely different than the documentary. It's really just a story about an advocate that's passionately working for a girl that she never knew. And so I just felt like it was an important story to tell. And because people ask me all the time, I wrote the book.
Yeah, why not, right?
And I may only sell 5 copies, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It was really just a therapeutic thing for me too, I think, just to kind of put it down because it's been a lot. It's been a journey. It's been fascinating. And I think people that want to advocate for others will probably find it interesting. I don't know. It's my first book that I'll put out there, and we'll just see what happens.
I'll definitely read it.
Oh, well, I'll let you have a copy. I'll send you a copy.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the closest book would be Michelle McNamara's book, May She Rest in Peace, on the work that she did in the Golden State Killer case. And I wish I could have met Michelle. I think we were soul sisters on so many levels, doing a lot of the exact same things in different parts of the country, and we just never met. And so I would think that's probably the closest, although my book, there's a lot of things that are different in it. I've read Michelle's book, but I think that it's just, I don't know. I think it maybe shows my heart and my passion a little bit more. And I hope that helps people understand why I'm on this journey.
Oh, definitely. Do you know when it's going to be coming out? Do you have a release date for the book?
I don't. I'm hoping it's going to be able to be launched this summer too. I'm actually under negotiation with the book. So it really isn't up to me. And, so summer or fall, as soon as I know, I'll let more people know. But yeah, I'm not really sure what's going to happen with it yet. And I'm excited about it because, I'm a journalist by trade. And so to actually be able to put my writing skills to use has been exciting because I do something completely different as my full-time job. So it's just interesting to be able to focus on that. I don't call it a hobby because it is a job, but it's also just something that I'm passionate about. So.
And to have everything that you've done written down, I'm sure when you look back and reread what you wrote, you're like, wow, you've done so much over so many years just that I know about, that I've just read. I can't imagine what's actually in the book.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's just a lot in there that just going back and looking through my notes, sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, okay. That should be revisited. So there was some things in the putting together of the book that I discovered that, because I told you earlier, write everything down.
Yeah.
that I went back to the lead detective and I said, this really bothers me. Can we look at this again? And so he and I were just talking about some of that last night. Like, yeah, let's revisit some of these things that I think could be important. So, it was a good process for me, and it was a good process for the case, I think, because there's just a lot of information. I mean, a lot. I think I have 30 notebooks full of information because I literally, when I talk to somebody, I write it down, then I write down my observations, then I write down my research, because you never know when you need to go back to it, and you never know when that information is going to be lost. It could be removed from the internet because that's happened, or people die.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, it's, again, document, because with a case that this old, people are dying all the time that are involved in the case or knew her. So,
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, that happens, I would imagine, with a lot of older cases.
yeah. And it's scary to me because you never want to lose that information. It's got to be preserved. And so that's the biggest thing that I've learned. And that's just, there have been situations where I learned the hard way.
Did you ever get the opportunity to speak to Melissa's mom?
I didn't. She passed away, I believe, in 2011. So that was many years before I had started this project.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's sad to me that she died without that kind of closure.
Oh, yeah.
And, faith was a big part of their life. They made no secrets about that. They attended church and believed in God. And, my faith is the same. And so that brings me a lot of comfort too, because I know that she's at peace with Melissa.
Yeah.
And that brings me so much happiness for her mom, because I know how badly she missed her on this earth. So,
oh, yeah.
yeah, I think that it's important to remember that some of the family members don't feel like right now, they're older and they don't want to rehash the story because it's so painful. And then there's other people who are just really pushing hard for justice, and you just have to be okay with where people are at.
Yeah.
And that's, this is a traumatic case, and it changed a lot of lives. And so we just try to be patient with people because there are still some people that haven't talked to us because they emotionally can't do it. And we just have to respect that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, everybody grieves differently. I would imagine everybody deals with a situation like this differently too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Is there any crowdfunding initiative available to help with the cost of this documentary?
We do have a crowdfunding link. Our biggest goals right now are to be able to raise the money to purchase billboards in pretty specific locations in Arkansas. And so we want to crowdfund for that. We're selling t-shirts, justice, the hashtag Justice for Melissa Witt t-shirt, to help us reach that goal. And we've sold a few, not a lot. There's only so many hours in a day, and I'd rather be working on Melissa's case. So
exactly.
So there's that. I've pretty much spent my own money on everything else. And we would like to raise the money to plant a bunch of trees in Melissa's honor in the Ozark National Forest. So that'll be the other thing that we're going to do. Yeah. Just kind of a permanent memorial. Love to have that rock removed, but it's in the Ozark National Forest and it's protected because it's the national forest. So
that is a great idea.
Yeah, those things are important to us, and anything else that we can do that brings value to the case. We're hoping to be able to digitize all the files for the police department and pay for that. And there's just a lot of stuff like that we do. I mean, I don't want to toot our own horn. It's just, we do it because it's important to Melissa's case. And if, God forbid, we don't see this solved, we want the people who are behind us to be able to have access to quality information that can be preserved in a digital format, which needs to happen in that particular case. So there's a lot of things that we do that I think it goes under the radar, and we don't have to announce it. I don't think people understand the level of dedication that this group of people have to Melissa Witt. We're planning for the long haul. If, like I said, God forbid, we don't see it solved, we want to have measures in place that will help the next people that come along and share any information that we've learned and connect dots that maybe we've connected. I'm in a unique situation because I'm not law enforcement. And so there's a lot of things that I can do and people I can talk to that I can handle a little bit differently than law enforcement could. And you better believe that I gather that information up and I share it. And we have a great relationship with the Fort Smith PD because they know they can trust us. And we run that tip line. It's that 1-800 number. And if anything comes through that's critical to the case, that's not already been a lead or something that's been vetted out that they've told us is no good, you can disregard, we turn it over. We don't keep information. We're not law enforcement. We're not trying to be law enforcement. I think that's important too for people to understand, is that we're not playing cop here. We're simply trying to add value to the case from an advocacy standpoint, which is a lot different.
Exactly. How can people help you most with this case?
That's a good, important question. And I think the best answer is that all of the information that we share on social media, so we've got Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're most active on Facebook, just to follow us and share the information, because I don't care if somebody lives in Michigan or if they live in Kansas or they live in, Africa. Yeah. If you follow us and you've got the information, please just share it. It just takes a moment to hit the share button, because you never know who you're connected to that has some kind of knowledge in a case. It never ceases to amaze me. And so I think just sharing that info, because everything that we put out on our Facebook page is credible, vetted, important information, and we don't share it unless we feel like it really needs to be out there, really. And so that's the best way people can do it. And get involved, interact on our page, ask questions. If you see a comment on our Facebook page and our team hasn't publicly answered it, if you think that we missed it, send us a private message and say, hey, did you see this? Because, sometimes we miss things, and communicate with us. I mean, we love that more than anything, is to have people say, hey, what can I do? How can I help? And then, we always respond. I personally respond to every Facebook message, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands. If you think we've answered a lot of emails, I bet we've answered 80,000 Facebook messages in the past 6 years. I mean, it's unreal. Wow. Yeah, we're probably pushing 100,000 if I'm just being real. I mean, people ask me questions and I try to personally answer every single person. And sometimes people will say, I really just would prefer to talk to you. And so I give them my cell phone number. Give me a call, text me, let me help you if I can. And so really that's just it. If you're somebody who wants to get involved as an advocate and you're interested in true crime, we'll put you to work. We'll give you different things to do. We'll give you a research assignment. And I would love to see more people get active like that, because that's the scariest thing that could happen to Melissa Witt's killer, is if we rose up an army on social media of 500 people who are researching and sharing and doing all these things. Can you imagine how frightening that would be for him?
Oh, absolutely.
He's watching us. If it's who we think it is, he's watching that Facebook page. That's interesting to me. And so if it's the other person that we've talked about, Larry Swearingen, he was executed in 2019, then obviously he's no longer alive, but we still feel like we could get information that could tie him to this case if he indeed is Melissa's killer. So there's still value. There's still a lot of value there.
Did you ever get a chance to interview him, or did the police ever interview him?
They did. So I don't know how well you followed that, but I had a real hate relationship with Larry Swearingen. And regardless if he was involved in Melissa Witt's case or not, he was a really, really bad dude. He killed Melissa Trotter, and he did correspond with me in prison some. Towards the end, he was having his attorney send me cease and desist. I think I have 6 or 7 of them. I don't know. I put them in a pile. Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever, Larry. I didn't ever personally get to sit down with him, but I made such a huge stink. I think I called, faxed, emailed, and wrote to Montgomery County and the prosecutor's office so much that they finally reached out to the PD in Fort Smith, and they did set up an interview between the PD and Larry Swearingen.
Okay.
And so that is something that's in our documentary, and not the interview itself, but I'm happy to share the info with you that when he found out they were with Fort Smith, he chose not to talk to them.
Oh.
That's an interesting thing. And, that could be that because he's guilty, that could be, or because I had been such an outspoken advocate against him that he thought, darn that LaDonna Humphrey, that probably went through his head too. So regardless, I have no regrets. I worked that angle and worked that angle. But then I also ended up having a lot of people hate me because I got death threats because of my work with Derek. Yeah. And when they executed Larry Swearingen, I got a package in the mail like a week later. And my husband called me and said, hey, you got this package it came from Texas. And I was like, really? Oh, maybe it's Larry's confession. Wouldn't that be amazing? And got home and no, it wasn't. It was a really ugly letter from one of his family members with photos of him after he died. Oh. And I was like, okay, well, I guess they told me that I could burn in hell. And, they said that Larry was just a saint and that he had never done anything wrong. He was falsely accused. So anyway, obviously he wasn't. He was convicted by, a jury in Texas and then ultimately paid for that crime with his life. So I'm going to have to disagree with his family that he's innocent. According to the state of Texas, he's not.
I do think that's really weird that he wouldn't talk to them, because you'd think if he was innocent, he'd want to talk and clear his name.
Well, you got to know about the psychology behind who Larry Swearingen is, or who he was. He was a really smooth talker, a liar too. And he's been described to me by dozens of people that I've interviewed who guarded him on death row, who guarded him when he was in prison, all of those things. He always wanted to talk. He always had something to say. And more than anything else, he had received like 5 or 6 days of his execution. And prior to the 2019 execution date, it kept getting put off and put off. And had he just simply talked to them and even said, okay, yeah, I had something to do with Melissa Witt's murder, he would have been given a stay of execution.
Yeah, you're right.
And he's smart enough to know that. So this is completely just opinion based right now. But if he was involved in Melissa Witt's murder, because it's almost identical to Melissa Trotter's murder, if he was involved, I really just think he was too tired to keep on fighting. And what a can of worms it would have been to have to deal with the Witt case on top of it.
Yeah.
And I think he was ready to be executed. And, the things that we know that he did, we know he raped and murdered Melissa Trotter, a 19-year-old college student in Montgomery County, Texas. He kidnapped her from a community college and he drove her 50, 60 miles away to a national forest where he murdered her and left her dead body, just like what had happened to Melissa Witt. I mean, the cases are almost identical. And it was like 4 years to the week that these two crimes were committed. It's just really, there's a lot of similarities that are pretty frightening.
Yeah.
And in addition to that murder, I mean, I've talked to several of his ex-wives whom he beat and raped and tried to strangle. I've got court records of people who testified against him, a woman that he kidnapped and took her over to state lines and raped her. He was a pretty violent predator. I do intend to write a book about him. I think I know more about Larry than Larry did. He could be good for the Witt murder. I mean, he's definitely one of the top 2.
Well, he was in the area visiting family, right?
He was. So he was about 2 hours away. We can place him there about 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours away, just days before Melissa's murder. I mean, it's completely possible, but we've never been able to place him in Fort Smith at the time of her murder. And that's the piece that we would need. And you better believe I worked that angle almost to death, did everything that you could imagine, and then found out he's been looked at and is looked at in several other girls who have been kidnapped and strangled across the United States. They're looking at Swearingen. So I think that it's quite possible that Larry Swearingen was a serial killer, but because of when a lot of those murders took place in the 90s, that was pre-social media. It was pre-NamUs. It was NamUs is a government database that helps with unidentified and missing persons cases. And I just think there's so much more technology now than what we had in the 90s that I think that he may have gotten away with being a serial killer. If he was one. There just wasn't as much cooperation between departments, not enough funding to do so. And it's almost impossible to go back and recreate some of that. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think I'm done with the Swearingen angle, especially until we can put the Witt case to rest. But Swearingen knew before he died what I thought, and I know what he thought. And so we'll just leave it at that. Maybe that is another book. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, there's just too many similarities that I don't know. I don't really believe in coincidences. So,
I agree with you. I completely agree with you. And, the interesting thing about that is Trotter and Witt looked a lot alike. I mean, there's just a lot of things about those two girls that were the same. And if Swearingen was involved, I would hope that we could find that connection that he had to Fort Smith. And I've talked to, like I said, several of his ex-wives, and they have told me on record, I think he killed Melissa Witt. I think he did it. I think he's capable of it. But again, there's got to be enough information. Him being an hour and a half to 2 hours away just isn't good enough. And so we won't give it up. I mean, we periodically put information out to see if somebody would come forward, but we don't. We think it's one of those situations that either somebody's just not seeing the information, or maybe they're deceased, or maybe they're too afraid. I don't know. I would hope that if people know anything about Swearingen and his potential connection to Fort Smith, that they would come forward.
Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think we covered a lot.
We
There's
did.
so many aspects of the case, and I could probably go on and on.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your time, and I'd love to keep you updated about the case. And do stay in touch with me. I love what you're doing, and if I can help you in any way, I would love to do that.
Thank you very much. And I will stay in touch. This has been great.